up, guys? Enkiri here. As some of you may have noticed, I've recently reintroduced sled work back into my training program, and man, was I missing out this past year. I'll take a break from these for a little while every now and then, and somehow I'll always forget just how absolutely freaking amazing this exercise is. I had been doing sled work religiously in 2017 when I still had access to a prowler. And some of you may have seen my 1,000-pound sled push from that same time period, which is a goal that took me several months to achieve. But since then, I haven't had access to a sled in recent history until just a few weeks ago when I built myself a nifty little one to use for dragging around my driveway. And with that as the impetus, I've been re-inspired because, frankly, dragging and pushing heavy-ass weights around like this is literally one of the hardest fucking things you can do in the gym, and probably one of the most overall beneficial exercises in existence. So today, I'm going to go over the top 5 reasons why you should be consistently incorporating sled work in your training program. So let's get to it. Reason number 1, and this is the most important reason for someone like me. Sled work builds a sort of functional leg strength that acts as a bridge between the strength you've built in the weight room and the strength, speed, and explosiveness that you're physically capable of displaying on the playing field. I learned about this idea about 6 or 7 years ago in an article written by Joe DeFranco, a guy who is famous for making athletes faster and more agile. What he was saying was pretty controversial at the time because it's widely accepted that to train for speed, you should never run with a resistance that slows you down by more than something like 10%. Don't quote me on that exact figure, but the idea is that if you were training for speed and you wanted to do resisted sprints, you would only ever be using a really light resistance. Well, DeFranco came along and suggested that athletes who want to get faster should basically load up a sled as heavy as they can and drag it for multiple sets of just 10 to 15 yards with a full recovery in between sets. The idea being that when you put enough weight on the sled, it forces you to hold a forward body angle that's identical to the acceleration angle used during an all-out sprint. So not only are you ingraining this posture into your nervous system, but you're also simultaneously strengthening the muscle groups responsible for executing it in the most absolute specific way possible. I love moving heavy weights, so this idea sounded great to me, and I gave it a shot. And a few weeks later, I ran the fastest 40-yard dash I've ever run in my life. Coincidence? I doubt it. So we know that forward sled drags can build speed, but what about backwards drags? Think about the action of the knees and hips during a backward sled drag. Now, compare that to the process of decelerating from an all-out run. The actions are quite similar. So now we have an exercise that can strengthen the deceleration pattern in a highly specific fashion. In order to change direction quickly, which is the fundamental basis of being agile, you first have to be able to stop quickly and abruptly. Backwards dragging can help train your legs to do that. And forwards dragging can help train your body to explode back out again after the fact. Thus, these two exercises are highly complementary when it comes to training for sport and overall athleticism, and should be performed by anyone who wants to improve their ability to move swiftly and powerfully. The second reason for including plenty of sled work in your training program is based on the idea that it can drastically increase your work capacity, which basically just refers to your body's ability to tolerate, recover from, and adapt to a given amount of stress. It's largely accepted that the more stress we can impose on our system, the more gains we can make, whether we're talking strength gains or muscle gains, assuming that our body is able to adequately recover from that stress. This is part of the reason why steroids are so effective, especially in elite athletes. When you have somebody who's basically willing to put in an infinite amount of work to become the best they can be, the limiting factor in performance improvement becomes the body's ability to recover. Well, steroids increase your body's ability to adapt to stress, allowing you to impose the stress more frequently or more intensely or in greater amounts than the body would be able to handle without them, thereby creating a much larger overall adaptation. In that same vein, sled work, though it feels very difficult while you're doing it and in the short period of time afterwards, is actually very easy for the body to recover from compared to, say, an equivalent amount of squat volume. Part of the reason for this is because it lacks an eccentric portion, which limits muscle damage and soreness. It also tends to pump a metric fuck ton of blood into whatever muscle group you're working, which actually promotes healing and recovery. I also suspect that the lack of spinal loading signals to the body that the stress being imposed isn't that big of a threat. Anyway, all this adds up to create an exercise that you can basically perform an unlimited amount of. And the more work you can acclimate your body to performing without pushing it over the edge, then the more work your body will be able to recover from, and ultimately, the more gains you'll be able to make. And this doesn't just apply to working with the sled. Once your body is acclimated to a large deal of low-stress work, like sled dragging, you can then use that as a segue to introduce larger volumes of high-stress work without running your body into the ground. It's a bit of an art, but the potential is there, and the idea definitely has merit. Massively high levels of work capacity is often what makes the best athletes, and the most profound and stable body composition changes, and just the most capable human beings in general. But you can't just dive into that willy-nilly. You have to prepare your body in an intelligent fashion first. You can do that over the course of many, many years through slowly increasing high-stress workloads like elite athletes do, or you can do it over the course of a few months by dragging around a heavy sled. The third reason to include plenty of sled work in your training program is because it can help you to add slabs of muscle onto your thighs. This kind of piggybacks onto the second reason, in that part of the muscle building effect is going to be due to your ability to perform and recover from incredibly large volumes of work. The thing about the sled is, it's actually a muscle and strength builder disguised as a conditioning tool. It just depends on how you view it, and most people choose to use it purely as a conditioning device. But that's a myopic viewpoint, because it's a fantastic strength and muscle builder as well, if you're willing to load up the weight. At this point, everyone has seen the famous pictures of German sprint cyclist Robert Forstemann's quads. And while he's a fairly extreme case, all you have to do is a cursory bit of searching to see that as a whole, these athletes all tend to have pretty impressive legs. Part of the reason for that is that squatting heavy weights leads to an improvement in cycling performance. So, to my knowledge, all these athletes squat heavy and relatively often, which, as I noted in my video, How to Build Huge Quads Naturally, is the best and most reliable way to build up your thighs in the long run. However, I think there's more to it in this case though, because honestly, some of these sprint cyclists seem to have bigger thighs than a lot of Olympic weightlifters. And that extra something is obviously the repeated maximal concentric contractions of their quads against the pedals of their bikes. Short, repeated bursts of all-out effort with plenty of time to recover in between bouts. And if you think about it, dragging the heavy sled is almost the exact same type of stimulus. With each step, you're concentrically contracting your quads into the ground with as much strength and power as you can muster, with minimal time in between contractions, and each effort in total lasting only about 20 to 30 seconds. If you perform enough of these brief but all-out maximal efforts, you're bound to see more leg growth than you would see just from weight training alone. The fourth reason to include sled work in your training is the one everyone thinks of when you talk about sled training, and that is as a conditioning tool. Pretty much no matter how heavy you go with these, you'll always be heavily taxing your cardiovascular system. And you can really feel it for your first few weeks before your body starts to become better acclimated to the work. But you'll always be huffing and puffing even after just dragging a weight for a short 15-yard set. If you're not, then you just didn't put enough weight on the sled. And this is going to ensure that you always have at least a decent base of conditioning to build off of anytime you choose to. You'll never be the guy who can't jump in and play a few games of pickup basketball because he's too out of shape, or who can't complete a tough hike up a mountain because his lungs just can't hack it. However, if you really want to rev things up a notch or two, all you have to do is go a little bit lighter, drag the thing a little bit farther, and cut your rest periods down a little bit, and now you have quite possibly the best cardiovascular workout in existence. As a side note, mixing some of this sort of work in makes for a fantastic finisher after you've done your heavier drags for the day. But this sort of work is what's really going to take your conditioning to the next level, and the effects really are threefold. One, you're taxing the cardiovascular system about as much as any other form of cardio conditioning. Two, you're increasing the ability of your legs to tolerate and buffer the effects of lactic acid buildup. And three, you're conditioning your mind and building up your mental toughness as well. After just a few yards with the sled, your legs are going to start burning, and you're going to be sucking wind like a chronic cigarette smoker. But no matter how badly it sucks and how much it may hurt, you can always take one more step. And the thing about knowing that you're able to take one more final step is that then you can take another, and then you can take another, and then you can take another. And this goes on and on forever. Your mind is the first thing to quit on you with these. And if you can convince yourself to push past that and just keep taking one more step, then you'll reach new heights not only in your physical conditioning, but in your mental conditioning as well. And finally, the fifth and final reason why you should include plenty of sled work in your training program has to do with its safety profile. For all the benefits I've already mentioned, they all come to you with very little cost. Most things in life don't work like this. Things that give a lot usually take a lot in return. But in this case, that notion doesn't seem to hold true. The sled gives and gives and gives, but it never takes. The risk of both chronic, long-term injury and acute injury seem to be very low. Eccentric movements are where most muscle strains and acute joint injuries occur. But because there is no true eccentric with the sled work, these risks are greatly reduced. Dragging a heavy weight behind you also slows things down enough that the risk of hamstring injuries is basically non-existent, as compared to sprinting where it's relatively high. Lastly, it doesn't really make you sore, and it doesn't put that same type of wear and tear stress on your joints that can often come part and parcel with traditional heavy strength training. On the contrary, and this part is certainly anecdotal, but in my experience it's actually beneficial for hip and knee health. I know when I do a lot of sled work, my hips and knees tend to feel better overall than they usually do. And so just by adding this one simple exercise into your training routine, you get all of these benefits. Increased leg strength, more leg muscle, better work capacity, and a healthier cardiovascular system. And you get it all with little to no risk on your part. You just have to be willing to put in a decent bit of sweat, tolerate a whole lot of pain, and maybe even forego a little bit of vomit to go along with it. Sounds like a win-win to me. And the thing is, you can't really go wrong with these sled exercises. Like I said, the overall injury risk is pretty low in general, and anyone can just pick one of these things up and get right to it. There's really no technique involved, and so there's no learning curve either. The only requirement is the willingness to show up and put in the work. And by no means is that going to be easy. In fact, like I said earlier, this is one of the hardest things you can do in the gym. But the temporary pain is more than worth the reward. I think I've pled my case at this point. Hopefully, I've convinced a few of you to add some more sled work into your training routines. And for the rest of you, well, I guess there's just no hope. And that's all I got for now, guys. Please be sure to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And definitely leave me some love in the comments down below. Keep training hard, and I will catch you guys next time.